and Janice Chiang. We will be joined by C.F. Godwell as our super fan. So he's, in fact, if you were here, I would actually include him. So we'll include him anyway when he comes in. He'll be surprised because he was apparently talking to you last night, Larry, and he tells me, and I don't know if it's true, but you can confirm or deny, that you have never really watched the cartoon.
Never seen an episode. No. I've never read any of the other G.I. Joe series that I didn't write. Never seen any of the animation. I like to keep my universe consistent. You know.
Yes.
People have written out characters and written in new characters, and they don't exist in my universe. So I've been writing the basically one story since 1982. I consider everybody else's stuff like deviations from it. And it's also, it's like, you know, with over 200 characters, you know, and, you know, 35 years of continuity, I don't want to have to be, you know, keeping track of it. And the beauty of it is that, you know, I don't have to think about writing G.I. Joe.
Right.
You know, I don't have to think about writing Wolverine. You know, I don't have to, there's books that I just don't, you know, I can just do falling off the horse. But, you know, they ask me to do other characters, and it's like, I've got to do all this research. I did a novelization of the death of Captain America, and I had to read like 3 or 4 years worth of stuff.
Before starting.
Yeah, because and I had a 3-month deadline to do a whole novel. You know, it's the only reason they gave me the novel was nobody else wanted to do it in 3 months. You know, but I hadn't read a Captain America comic since Jack Kirby worked on it, so there was a lot to catch up on.
I only read comics that I letter. It's like I have no time.
Exactly.
And when they send me the, you know, complimentary copies, I don't have time to like, oh yeah, this. But anyway.
I don't think I've actually read a comic book since 1966.
It was a good year. I can see why you quit after that. The Blackest trilogy, you know?
No, because after 1966, I realized that everything in the balloons and the captions, you know, was like, didn't make any difference. That all I was interested in was the visual storytelling. You know, if I can't tell what's going on by just looking at the pictures, I'm not interested.
It's funny you bring that up about Nothing Else Counting. When they offered me the idea of G.I. Joe book, you know, they had a bunch of titles, right, set in sort of a separate G.I. Joe universe, and they did the thing that comic book publishers do, which is like, well, you have to write the mainline G.I. Joe book. I was like, that's great. Snake Eyes is dead. Wait, what? Can't have Snake Eyes. All right, well, I got Scarlet though, right? Nope. Scarlet has her own book, and I was like, well, but. How are we going to do a G.I. Joe book with like Scarlet, without Scarlet or Snake Eyes? And they're like, well, that'll be in Larry's book. And I was like, Larry has a book too? Wait, do you mean Larry Hama? They're like, yeah. Like, I'm competing with Larry Hama on a G.I. Joe book. That's like competing with Jesus at a Jesus convention. So at that moment I realized, I didn't think my stuff counted either.
Well, I just want to reinforce what Larry said about in comics, we want the visual storytelling to be strong. And, you know, it's like, no matter what language you speak or read, if you understand the visuals, you can be part of it. So as a letterer, you know, my job is, okay, it's pointing to the correct people and such. And I need to reflect the 3D world in a 2D setting. So what I do is like, first off, I want the reader to like read quickly so they get the story. But when they come back a second time, they need to look at the art. So when I place things, I don't want to interfere with, you know, the storytelling. So the quickest thing to explain is like light source. It's like in filmmaking, the light determines the color design, you know, shadows and such. So if I see a panel where there's a lamp or a light hanging down, I do not cover it. So as fans, that's owed to you from letterers. You know, so kick back when you see crappy lettering, which is digital and covering willy-nilly.
Right.
That's like killing the whole experience. You know, that's why I cannot look at house comics lettered by a certain style, DC and Marvel. It's like repugnant. You know,
Well,
like
that's the thing
Samey.
about lettering is that like my favorite comic book artists always considered the lettering and the balloons and the captions a part of the drawing. You know, and that lots of comics are lettered. They just put butt the balloons up against the top
Right.
of the panel, and they butt the captions on there. And like, I know that Russ Heath and Barry Smith and a bunch of other guys, they thought that was anathema. They thought that the balloons have to have color surrounding them, right? Because it looks ugly. It makes for bad design to have these things up.
well,
up.
sometimes we are butted because
Well, there's no room.
the writer is so worried because he
Right.
does not trust the artist. I hate it when you get like a ton load of copy, and it's like, how are they going to see the people?
No.
I hate hunchback balloons. So you see that
Yeah.
in a lot of comics. It's
The,
like,
the main
should not
reason
be.
I started campaigning to get writing work was that I was drawing Iron Fist, and I had spent an entire day drawing this complicated background of the Himalaya mountains with the clouds breaking
Goodness.
and beams of sunlight coming through and flocks of birds and,
Where are you going with this story?
You're gonna get covered by a balloon.
and the writer inserted something like 9 captions, all of which were things like, and as the beams of light, all he was doing in the caption was describing all the artwork that I had labored on for all day and covering it up.
Was this one of the most famously verbose writers in comics writing Iron Fist still at this point?
What?
Was this one of a famously verbose writer writing
Yes,
comics?
it was,
at this
yeah,
point? Yeah.
very verbose. Guy was doing something like 9 books a week or something, and this guy was making more per page for script than I was
Right.
making I was making $23 a page to pencil this thing, and he was making like $50 a page
Just
to
like
write
this
it.
typing.
I'm-
Right, and I realized that I can only do a page, a day. I was making like $125 a week, which was less than I could have made flipping burgers at Mickey D. And this guy was making like $8,000 a week.
Writing a lot
You
of
know,
books.
and
Right.
plus, he got like 15% of the originals.
Oh wow. I didn't know that.
Because the policy was written by writers who were editors. So like, there were all these writers
Getting art
who could draw, who could write literally 100 times more pages a week than I could draw. They were amassing 10 times more pages
Right.
than I could ever get.
Right.
because
Did you ever get the originals?
No, I only got one original. Jim Lee gave it to me after I got my Inkpot Award last year in
wow.
San Diego.
All right.
Awesome.
Because
Woo!
I lettered Jim's first job, so I've lettered a lot of pros' first job. Rob Liefeld, you name it. And when they meet me in person, they go, at first I didn't know why. I said, oh yeah, I took away your virginity. And they put an amateur to a pro.
There you go.
Right,
So
right, right,
I
right.
finally realized what that look was.
You never
You
forget
like
your,
it?
you never forget your first.
Exactly.
Yeah, but that's the thing about what else. Okay, the point was that if the balloons
Are dominating.
and the
Fight.
stuff
Yeah.
really have to be integrated. Russ Heath, when he would pencil a story, would Greek in all the lettering,
That helps.
and then he would ink the balloons and ink the captions so nobody else could mess with it because he felt that it was that important. If you look at Barry Smith's Weapon X, same thing. All the captions and balloons float, and that's why it looks so graphically beautiful. You know, you compare that to another piece of work where all the balloons are butted up against stuff. It looks ugly.
Right.
You know.
I'm doing a job right now where I'm lettering my own scripts, but I'm lettering the layouts, like just the thumbnails, and so I'm lettering them on the computer, and then the artist, to me this seems ridiculously complicated, but then he prints them out on 11 by 17, he's got an 11 by 17 printer, and then he lightbox them,
Yeah.
and then he pencils and inks with drawing in the balloons, and so he knows exactly where all the lettering is at all times, so there's not any wasted lines.
Well, let's see. I really think that, you know, people should know how to do all the different jobs.
Right.
I mean, I was probably the only editor at Marvel that had a rate for every single job in the industry. I had a lettering rate, a coloring rate, a pencil rate, a script rate, you know, layouts, blah, blah, blah. You know, and if you know what the various people who are working, you know, collaborating with you, how they do it and what's involved with how they do it, that can really help you streamline what you do.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because then you're not repeating stuff, you're not, you know, doing somebody else's job for them.
Yeah, because the writer who put all those captions, that belongs in the script when I get art direction. You know, that's the signal what the writer wants to see from the artist.
Yeah.
Stay out. You know, you don't actually describe it, which is redundant.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, you know, when I first started doing G.I. Joe, I didn't use captions or thought balloons. You know, and at that time, that was
Radical.
Right.
everybody else was using captions all over the place and, you know, thought balloons. And I thought, no, the story has to be told with the pictures,
Action.
you know, and the acting. And so I got rid of all of that. And everybody says, oh, you can't, you know, you got to have, you know, captions. You know, within 10 years, my method was the standard.
Right. Right.
You know?
Thought balloons never really came
Even the
back.
letter.
Yeah, all that stuff never came back because it gradually people went, oh,
Yeah.
you
That
know,
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't need it.
We talked
Because
about this.
oftentimes you make these changes, and you have to do them sort of sub rosa, and nobody realizes that you've done it, and all of a sudden, it's the standard.
Standard.
Right.
You know, when I was an editor at DC, you know, my first day on the job, I realized they were still coloring Asian people yellow.
Oh my God.
So I went to the head of the production department, and I said, well, how come you know, this is like 1978 or 79. Why are we coloring
yellow.
Asian people bright yellow? And the guy said, well, we've always done that. And I said, well, maybe you should stop. And, you know, it wasn't like people would do something because they were racist or
Right,
whatever. It was because, oh, we've always done it that way. You know, and all it takes, you know, you don't have to
Lazy habits.
have to have people picketing or
Right.
you know, raising a stink. All you have to do is have somebody in the
Position.
belly of the beast
Yeah.
actually saying, no, I don't think that's a good idea, you know, and, you know, rational people will understand that.
I think, Larry, was another innovation you made when they started making toys was the description of the characters, like the MO. That's something you standardized, didn't you?
What, the dossiers, the file cards?
Yeah, in the back of
Yeah,
In the back of
created-
the toys,
Yeah, I created these, what I call dossiers for the G.I. Joe characters because I realized there were 10 Joes and a bunch of Cobras to start with. There was like 15 characters. And I knew that at Marvel, you know, what they call the gang books or the group books, you know, people hated working on those because they would go, oh, the artists would go, oh, there's so many uniforms. They had to constantly refer to them, and all the writers would go, you know how hard it is to juggle 15 characters?
Don't get me started.
You know, and try to get them equal screen time and all that. So I thought I would make life easier for myself by having this reference for myself. So I wrote up these
Right.
things. I even had psychological profiles. I had peer assessment, the statements. I had, other Joes talking about the character
Right.
in their voices. Then, of course, I listed all the education and the skills and stuff. And I had these sitting on my desk, and Kurt Bazikian from Hasbro came by the office, and he saw them on the desk, and he said, "Oh, we should put these on the back of the package." So it was Kurt
Yeah. And then they did.
who boiled. I would have like 2 to 3 pages of stuff, and he boiled it down to
Yeah.
like 2 paragraphs. And the immediate reaction from salespeople was that, give us more of those, because all we have to do when we go to Toys R Us or KB's, to sell the product, we just read the file folders,
Right.
and they buy them.
I did.
And then,
There you go.
and then I,
That's why. Huh?
the day I knew that, it was really working, was I was watching David Letterman, the original
Yes,
incarnation.
sure.
When he used to have Jay Leno as a guest. And one night Jay Leno came on David Letterman, and all he did was read the file cards on the backs of dreadnoughts. Because he was feigning outrage, because he rides a motorcycle. That
Gotcha.
this was like, maligning.
Prejudiced against motorcyclists.
Right.
You came to all of this with a sort of funny background. We talked about this last year, as we was not a G.I. Joe panel, it was just a Larry Hama panel. But you talked a lot about your background, your military background. You have a background with munitions and weaponry, and as I recall, all of G.I. Joe for you sort of came from an angle that they were looking to, that it wasn't a linear comic books, that there was Hasbro wanted to be interested, they had a toy, that there was more to
But
it
I've never
than
been
just-
interested in doing a military comic. You have to understand that.
Right.
I'm a duck man. I came into the business wanting to do Uncle Scrooge. But I could never manage to get that gig, and nobody was hiring funny animal writers. The only work there was superhero
Superheroes.
stuff. Yeah. So I did the only work that was available.
Which was,
Well, mostly I started out at in the undergrounds. I started out working with Crumb and Spiegelman and Jay Kinney and Trina Robbins and Kim Deach on Gothic Blimp Works, which was Sunday Funnies at the East Village Other. It was being put together by my old pal Vaughn Bodie. And this was in the '60s. This was the beginning of underground comics. We had the first show, Bob Stewart put together the first legitimate art show of underground comics at the Corcoran Gallery of Modern Art in Washington,
Whoa.
D.C., which is a legitimate,
Yeah.
as legitimate as you can get. And I got the we were all included in this show, and this was in 1968. So that's I and some of the guys who worked on Gothic Blimp Works were like Bernie Wrightson and Mike Kaluta, doing their first stuff.
Sure.
Because none of us could get in the door at the
big
big
companies.
companies because they were closed shops. I mean, at DC, you had Carmine Infantino and Gil Kane and all these guys that were doing 2 books a week or something. They didn't want some punk kids coming in who could only do a book a month. So
that was that.
yeah, so when I came out of the Army, I didn't want to go back to my old job of drawing shoes for Sears Roebuck catalogs.
You and Andy Warhol.
What?
Right, that's right.
You and Andy Warhol.
That's right.
Well, I wasn't at the same time. I was after Andy Warhol.
Yeah, but he did the same
But I had his desk.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, they said, oh, you take that desk in the corner. That's where old Weird Andy used to sit. But so my friend Ralph Reese had gotten work, and doing black and white stuff, and he had some work from National Lampoon. And he said to me, well, look, you can pencil faster than I could ink, and I could ink faster than you can pencil. So if we teamed up, we could actually maybe make some money. And
Is that how Krusty Bunkers was
yeah, so
formed?
we started a little studio, and we did all this work for National Lampoon, Electric Company, Children's Television Workshop, Esquire, Rolling Stone, and then at the same time I was working for Wally Wood as his assistant on Canon and Sally Forth, and when Woody moved to Connecticut, he sicked me on Neil Adams. He said, hey, give this kid a seat at your studio. That's how I got in the door of continuity. And, Neil got me my first comic book job by telling DC that if they gave me an 8-page horror script, he would ink it. But Neil shoehorned a lot of people into business that way. He got in the door at DC, and he held it open for Wrightson, Kaluta, Jeff Jones, because to do covers and stuff, because this is quite different from what
Their
DC had
system.
before.
Yeah.
The house look, and all of a sudden you had Jeff Jones semi-painted covers on DC Comics. I mean,
Yeah.
we have a lot. The industry has a lot to thank Neil Adams for.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Anyway,
I got my bucket over here.
I went way off subject.
No, it's okay, but so Fred,
Yes.
no, when people are interested in that sort of thing. So
Okay.
Fred, I wanted to ask you though, is that when you picked up the book,
Right.
I assume you did, I don't know if you watched the cartoon or read the comic, I assume you did some background on it.
No,
Or did you, like Larry, just focus on your own?
I did focus on my own. I did check out a lot of the comics. I was such a superhero nerd when I was a kid. I avoided G.I. Joe, but I knew that all of my friends who hated superhero comics, G.I. Joe was the only comic they read. So it had a huge amount of respect. But yeah, you also get when you end up taking a job like this, they're like it's a number one, but it's not a reboot, right? So you have to you're kind of stuck with all the continuity. So I did try to make it a bit closer to what I remembered and what I read from what Larry was doing. And
This is nothing against you, but I mean, it's not who was writing it. I just didn't want to read any of this.
No.
I didn't want to, pollute. Bad word to use, but
Influence,
I didn't want
yeah,
have
absolutely.
my continuity.
Yeah, no. The only
Yeah.
thing that I was sort of dismayed by was I was like, well, who's going to be reading my book if Larry has his book? Because they sell the job like you're going to be the G.I. Joe guy, and you're like, great, and then like you look up and there's Larry Hama still there.
I don't think IDW or Devils Do really knew what they were doing with the product.
Yeah.
I mean, they wouldn't let me write the main book at Devils Do.
Oh, really?
No, and they didn't let me write the main book
At
at
IDW.
IDW
Yeah.
either. They figured I was washed up.
Did they just want the novel? Because wasn't there a significant gap between when did Real American Hero start up after the Marvel series end? Was there a big gap or
Yeah.
no gap at all?
It was a gap, maybe 5 years or something, 6 years. It wasn't a huge gap.
You're right.
Yeah, but they thought they could, make it better.
Well, what
which
the
is- I
kids
don't
today will want to read or whatever.
To you, yeah. What I don't understand is that, if I took over a book that I didn't create, I tried to have as much respect for the original as I could.
Yeah.
I figured, if they're going to give me, Wolverine to do, I mean, I'm going to try to do my own innovation, but, why piss in the pond,
Right.
it's like,
Well, yeah, and that's sort of my shtick whenever I take over a book. Like, my secret weapon is I go back to the beginning and check out what made it work beforehand. And I think my entire storyline came from, I remember reading the story about Springfield, which was in the first year of the original run, right, where Cobra takes over this small American town, and I based my entire first arc on that. Because that was my favorite thing from when,
well, Springfield is a favorite with the fans.
Yeah. Well, justly so, right?
Yeah.
So,
Oh.
but again, I thought I was, the guy, and that's what I was sold as. But I was simply the new guy.
Well, I remember really always being upset when like a new writer would take over an established book and immediately kill off major characters.
Yeah.
So- because they're not doing it because any reason other than to like make their mark.
Right, sure.
I mean, and that's bullshit.
Yeah.
And like what they kill off Superman like 3 times.
That's true. They made bank on that the first time they did it,
Yeah,
and then they keep.
yeah. They thought, oh, that worked the first time.
It's like Gene Gray.
I think there's a public trust, in terms of that kind of stuff for sure, and the bigger the character. We did
That's the reason I killed Snake Eyes, was that I realized that I was always expendable. If somebody else got the license, they would follow the lead of Devil's Due and IDW and get somebody else to write it, and and the first thing they would do would kill Snake Eyes.
Is he like the Jean Grey of G.I. Joe? He's been
Yeah.
killed so many times.
Yeah.
So I figured, if
Kill
somebody
every
was
year.
going to kill him,
You were gonna-
it better be me.
Beat him
Right,
to the
right.
punch.
Right.
So, as the only person who seems to have read the series, are there any continuity issues that you can come up with, or were there not?
I want to know who was responsible for killing Quick Kick? And
I was.
That was you. Okay. He's not back, of course.
No, he's not coming back.
Okay. He's not coming back.
Never.
I remember that issue. It was devastating.
I didn't like Quick
No.
Kick. I thought he was.
There was a few of them that got killed. Doc.
I didn't like his outfit. I didn't like.
So we killed him.
It was too master of kung fu. It was
Ridiculous.
It was it was an Asian character created by somebody other than me.
Okay.
Right,
like
right.
I said, no, that's not going to do it.
That's what I wanted to
Doesn't
ask
come
you. Did you create? Hasbro came to you with these characters, or did you create any of them?
Some of them.
Okay.
I mean, some of them were just sort of handed to me.
Okay.
I mean, I think.
Tell us if you don't mind.
I mean, they handed Destro to me,
Right.
already named. But I came up with the whole Scottish background. Because
And the figures were already in the stores when this began, or were they still working on that?
what do you mean? No, they would give me basically the black and white prototype drawings that were done by Ron Rudat. In the first year, they gave me like 10 black and white drawings, and they were fairly crude because the molding was fairly crude back then.
Right.
And they were labeled like commando, intelligence, mortar guy,
You gave them.
laser trooper, blah blah blah. And so I had to come up with a real name for the character, plus their file name, their real name, their backgrounds, and all that stuff.
And then how long was it before the toys came into the story? I just don't recall myself when the toys and the
I
and
can't
the book.
remember stuff like that, but
Which was-
I
I think
do.
the comic
The
was.
comic came first.
The comic was the comic was first, I think,
Yeah, that's what I
and
remember.
But it was conceived as a
it was all
For a
one
toy.
piece.
Yeah.
The thing was, they were very reluctant to do female figures right
Right.
from the beginning.
Right.
Their thinking was, if it's a female figure, it's a doll,
right.
not an action figure.
Sure, boys won't play with
And
girl
boys will not be caught dead buying a doll.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And I said, no, that's not true.
The women
And-
warriors.
and, we needed to
of
create,
centuries.
on the first issue, I realized that all the Cobras had no faces. They were completely covered. And how can you have dramaturgy without agents of expression, you know? So I said, I gotta create a Cobra character that has a face that, you know, so the character can interact with Cobra Commander and, like, you know,
Right.
we could see some reaction. So I said to her, okay, well, while we're at it, let's make her a hot babe. And let's put her in a complete black leather outfit. And so he came up with, you know, that first Baroness drawing, and Hasbro decided to make a figure,
Right.
a mail order figure, and they were like, holy smoke. Everybody wanted it.
Yeah,
It's a
you know.
keeper.
It's still it's one of the most popular cosplay characters.
So that, you know, broke the ceiling, broke the ice. All of a sudden, we got to come up with more and more female characters all the time.
Right.
So I thought that was good.
And you were there.
Can I ask a random GI Joe
of course,
question?
of course.
This just came into my head randomly today. At any point, did Marvel ever come to you and be like, "Can you put Spider-Man in here? Can we get the Avengers?" Like, was there ever any pressure to cross-pollinate with the Marvel universe?
Never.
Would you have
Well, because
resisted that if they had? Probably.
Yeah. Well, they couldn't do that because it was a license. You know.
Because Team America, which was a toy, also did a They in fact premiered in Captain America.
I think the Transformers had a Marvel universe.
Did the Transformers
crossover
have
too,
it?
didn't they?
Yes, they did.
But they had some sort of weird deals with that. You know, the
Right.
problem with inserting your own characters in somebody else's license is that licensor owns all that stuff. You know?
Sure.
Right.
I mean, so it would fall out of your hands. I mean, all the stuff that I did for Marvel is owned by Hasbro. So whoever has the new license can reprint it.
Sure.
Right.
Right. See, that's the value of that license, is that
So I'm sorry.
if the present company loses a license and it goes to another company,
they can reprint
the new
your
company
work.
can reprint all the Marvel stuff, all the Devil's Due, all the IDW, and all the Skybound.
Interesting.
Oh yeah.
I
Yeah.
realize
Oh, yeah.
that.
So that's what makes the license worth money.
I wrote Conan. I'm now like on my third publisher reprinting my Conan
Right.
comics.
Right.
But Conan's is public domain.
No. Well, that's super
Marvel had it
complicated. No,
recently.
it's a coterie of lawyers.
Got it.
Yeah, and I think the lawyers that represent the Howard estate changed to like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, they're branded now as like Heroic Publishing or something
Right.
like that. But I was just curious if
it's a
only
good question.
to like Dazzler sales are flagging. Can we get Dazzler in GI Joe? You know, right? Because that's what happens a lot of times.
Sure.
You know, like the
They brought
editors come
Dazzler
here.
back.
I lettered the first run of Dazzler.
Oh, there you go.
I think the rumor is Taylor Swift will be playing in the.
There you
They're
go.
trying. Yeah.
Really?
You know how it is. That's a fan casting, I think.
Yeah, right.
But
Well, they want a short.
yeah, sure. By the way,
What does Taylor Swift need with Dazzler?
They need her.
She likes roller skating. Wants to do it on film.
But we digress.
Didn't they get rid of her roller skates?
Sadly, yes.
They did get rid of
They'll
them.
come back.
Finally, with the disco lights on them or the
You
glass
guys,
on them.
I feel like you're not anticipating the fact Disco's going to come back.
Saying that I could write for other comic book companies while I was a full editor at Marvel. So I started writing The Young Master, a samurai strip for Eerie magazine for Louise Jones, who's now Louise Simonson. And that was my first regular writing work. But I couldn't get anybody to give me writing work at Marvel, so I took G.I. Joe just to get my foot in the door. And after it was like the number 1, number 2 selling book in the country, I went back and I said, well, look, haven't I proven anything? And they all said, no, G.I. Joe is a fluke. We're not going to trust you with any, A-list book. And they said, but we have this one book that's about to be canceled because the sales have flagged so far, and nobody's interested in this character anymore. I said, well, who is it? And they said, Wolverine. So I said, I'll take it. And at that point, you know, Wolverine was like an alcoholic living in Madripoor, you know.
Oh,
and
okay.
hanging out in some bar, being depressed, you know.
That's what the kids want.
We got Snake Eyes in there.
Yeah, so,
Right?
Boost his sales a little
yeah,
bit.
so, you know, I took over within a year, Wolverine was the #2 selling book in the country.
Right.
And I went back and I said, look, you know, I got the #1 book, the #2 book.
I wanted the number 3 book.
Okay, can we sort of talk about, you know, me being able to write other stuff? And they said, no, Wolverine is a fluke too.
Oh my
Not,
goodness.
you know, he's completely different from the other X-Men characters.
Right,
blah,
sure.
blah, 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 blah. I said, well, maybe he's completely different because I'm writing him, you know? And they didn't want to hear it, you know. So another year goes by and I'm still bugging them and they say, well, we got this other book that we might cancel. Because
Oh, nice.
the sales are so low. And I said, okay, what is it? I'll take it. And they said, it's the Avengers.
Perfect.
You know, so the thing is, when I took over G.I. Joe, all my friends in the business told me, if you take on G.I. Joe, this licensed toy book, you will never be offered an A-list book in this industry for the rest of your life. And they were right. I've never been offered an A-list book while it was an A-list book.
They don't like it when they send you on a suicide mission and you come back.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
It
basically.
confuses them.
Yeah. So,
And yet G.I. Joe's been so enduring. I mean, really, it really obviously. I'm curious, and maybe everybody can contribute on this one, is that why? Considering it was, I mean, again, and interestingly enough, I mean, the Transformers have done very well, but I don't have the sense that the comic book is nearly as well received as the G.I. Joe. I'd be hard pressed to find a toy tie-in comic book. Rom the Space Knight did okay for a minute, has a funny cult following, but has certainly not been nearly so enduring. What is it about the G.I. Joe?
Yeah, for me, it was more at stake with G.I. Joe. You know, it wasn't going to be a dark Snake Eyes saga. It wasn't coming back. It was like if someone died, it was over. And I don't know, it just stuck. It was my father was a military guy in the Korean War. It just stuck. It worked. When I saw that first cover, I was like, I need this. There's a bunch of us that was saying like, we got to get this book.
well, you know, it was also, you know, the beginnings of diversity in comics. You know, it was like one of the first comics that had,
Yes.
you know, African American characters that were up front.
Stalker.
You know, we weren't like, you know, the secondary guy. There were Asian characters. There were Latino characters. You know, and there were characters from every state in the union. You know, so that, you know, and I had a map, you know, with pins in it. And when I had to do the new Joe's files, I would like, well, what state isn't represented? You know, that way, you know, some kid in Idaho could like, you know, have a comic that had a character from Idaho in it.
Right.
And that's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
You know, and the other thing is I utilized the letter column. I insisted on doing my own letter column. And what I would do is I would choose 10 letters that were about the same subject, and print one letter, and write, and at the end of the answer said, oh, and these people wrote in also, and I would list.
Right.
So each letter column had 50 names.
With one letter.
Yeah, you know.
Building your
And
audience.
every one of those kids that got their name printed in the comic made their mom go out and buy 10 more. You know, I mean,
Right.
you have to utilize what you got.
Yeah.
And respect your audience.
Yeah. I read every letter that came in. You know, and I was getting 300-400 letters a week. And if the kids didn't like something, it was gone. And if they liked something, there was twice as much of it. You know.
Yeah. No, I got it. I got
And
it.
if you're not doing that, if you're not looking at your feedback,
Right.
you know, that's like playing a live gig, at some club, and not listening to how the audience is reacting. You know, they're not applauding. They're not doing anything. Well, I'll just keep on doing what I'm doing.
Right.
Whereas if you're a live performer,
there's an interaction
you're
between
riffing
the
off
audience, of course.
off the audience. If they like something, you know what you're doing is right.
Right.
Well, also, like, is there something to the fact that just as a genre, like, it's a war book where the conflict is, as an escapism, is very black and white. Not that your characters are black and white necessarily; they're not. That's what's so great about them. Also, I think that's another reason. There's there's interesting people on both sides of the conflict. It's not a war like we have in the real world, where there's actual people on other sides, both of whom think they're fighting, on the right side. It's good
guys.
It's more of a
And people
escapism.
with warts and peccadillos and stuff. I mean, I could always tell when Hasbro would get some other person to write a file card. Because in the file card it would always say, "Oh, he's the best at what he does," and he's, the character was perfect because they didn't want to write a file card saying something negative. I made sure that every character had some sort of
Balance.
flaw.
character flaw.
Mentally unstable. Right?
Yeah,
Pension for drinking.
Hates puppies.
exactly.
Right. Huh. So, but that's so interesting to me, and yet they wouldn't give you any A-list books, because what's funny is that Corey is talking about the stakes so high, Fred is talking about oh yes, this black and white and you're talking about technical things, and I know Janice is also to some degree, which is so interesting to me because of course they can all exist at the same time. Is that you guys are really talking about? I say technical things that that would work if it were Superman, that would work if it were something else. Those types of things, doing the letter page the way that you do it, so that you have an audience that's interested, that feels like their name's been printed. Well, that's like an easy trick, by the way.
It's an easy trick.
I can tell anybody anything that way, and obviously the notion of back and forth or listening, and being able to, if it's good, we keep it. If it stinks, we get rid of it.
Right.
What does the audience have to say?
But my turning point about letter columns came out. I was working on the letter columns. I had a big stack of letters, and I was like making notes. And Stan Lee was still in the office at the time. He had the office at the end of the hall. He was going out to lunch or something. He passes my open door, and he looks in, and he sees I'm working on a letter column, and he says, "You should never forget when you're doing the letter column that you don't know which one of those kids writing into you is in an iron lung." And I was like, what?
Solid logic.
Exactly, Claude. You're right. I know.
Good advice.
True.
And he walks off, and I'm going, I had never thought of that,
Everyone matters, basically.
Right.
What do you-
And then, I mean, you can't just
Dismiss them.
dismiss
Right.
Well, I mean that guy was the master of the letter column.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think Marvel particularly was very good at the, kind of inclusive that people do. We do panels about Marvel all over the country, and we all the time get people that come out that talk about when they were a little kid. They did the game where they had the comic book pushed up on their nose across the floor when they would do these junkets, and and it was really a very important aspect of
Well, Marvel always had interesting letter columns. DC had terrible letter columns. Why was that?
The editors, you assume, they're just a different personnel.
I don't. Do they? I mean, they must.
Does DC
Some
have a letters column?
Now, I have no idea.
very rarely you find
Do
it.
any comics have letter columns
Occasionally.
anymore?
Very
do.
occasionally.
G.I.
We
Joe.
have social
G.I.
media.
Joe has
Yeah.
a big letter column.
There we go. There we go.
Always, G.I. Joe had it.
Now we have social media.
Right,
Like,
sure.
Yeah.
Twitter is one big letter column.
Yeah, so it would seem. So it would seem.
That's what it is.
I think, but again, it's interesting to me, and Janice, maybe you could talk about this a little bit. Is that you're talking about the visual storytelling, and we start teasing when I say, and the script doesn't matter, and the continuity doesn't matter, and all that matters is the way the action lays out. And of course, that isn't entirely true.
No.
But I mean, was G.I. Joe particularly visually different in some aspect than a Superman comic was? Was there something about the way that it was structured, or something about the content?
Well, you know, truth to tell, Danny and, I mean, Ralph Reese and Larry, I just said my husband's name, taught me how to letter at Neil Adams' studio. So I had a good feel of, you know, and Larry was my editor on so many titles, you know, Conan the Barbarian, just Punisher, War Journal and stuff. So when I lettered G.I. Joe, it was in his style. So, you know, it's like, yeah, whatever books he touched and edited, there was that consistency, there was that vision. So, you know, my job is get it on time and, you know, provide the quality that's expected to make it a good reading experience.
Well, I think we're about out of time here, so I want to thank my panelists. I want to thank my audience. Appreciate everybody. I think this whole crowd is over at our Sally.
Yep.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to come out and ask questions or see us, we'll all be there to do it.
I'm across from the nerds.
So are Larry and Jim.